I am in the same team as Nicoletta, and I cover all of our partners, our distributors. But I'm taking you through the security element of things today. Sorry, my voice is also going, so this isn't going to go well. So I'm taking the security element. And why are we looking at this as part of the DNA messaging? Why is that important? So it's great that we can look at cloud, and we can look at automating sections of the network, and we can look at doing all the analytics. That's fantastic. But the thing we're all going to get asked by the customer is, well, that's wonderful, but how do you secure that? How is that safe? Is it safe? And how do I know I'm not going to be shipping out a lot of information and making it much more easier for people to hack into? And that's why we've added this security element to thing, particularly with a product we acquired a little while ago now called Stealthwatch from a company called Lancope. So it's a big, big part. It's a key part, really, I think, in our DNA messaging, because the rest of it can't really happen for our customers if it's not secure. So I'm going to start on the whiteboard rather than over there. And we've got a big thing about whiteboards at the moment, so I'm jumping on the bandwagon. So where did it come from? Why is security such a big part of networks? So in the old days, not that long ago, you had your network, and you secured it. Typically, you had your endpoint there, which was your PC. I haven't done art since GCSE, so it's been a while. That's your PC, and you've got your little telephone. That is a phone. Just ignore the drawing. And you had your DMZ here. So you had your firewall, and everything was kind of secured at these 2 points. You could say, right, I want to pop security on the endpoint, security in the DMZ, and everything's fairly locked down where people want to go and get to. And then, of course, we had things start popping up that people wanted to get to. So we had cloud-based tools that people wanted to use, like Salesforce, sort of video channels people want to get to, like YouTube. You had Gmail, you got Dropbox, all these other applications sitting here, which suddenly opened that world up a little bit more, which meant the security wasn't so easy to just lock down at this side. And then at this side, those lovely people at Apple and Samsung came out with these great smartphones. That's a phone. Tablets, and now we've also got these lovely watches as well that connect to our phones and tablets. But there's also loads of other stuff. So there's tons of things on this side. So I'm going to draw a cow, because there's actually a farm in Surrey. That's a cow, not a horse. There we go. It's an animal connected to the network. So there's a farm in Surrey that have actually connected cows to the network with wireless sensors. So they can monitor the health of the animal. They can see if they're eating properly, if they get lost in a field somewhere and fall in a ditch. They can monitor a lot. So we're not just talking about that on the end of a network. We've got these endpoints. So you've kind of got this sort of, I call it a firecracker effect, where the endpoints have both exploded at either side, both at the DMZ and also with the actual physical endpoints. So we can no longer talk about security just being in these two places, because, well, how do you do that? It's like nailing jelly to a tree. So we talk about now actually putting security into the fabric of the network instead. So actually being able to say, right here, where everything is passing through and everything is traveling, let's look at that instead. Let's look at the flow of data going across this network. And that is where Stealthwatch sits, right smack bang in the middle of everything, to say, I'm looking at everything passing across this network to see what is it doing. Am I seeing worms, denial of service attacks, exfiltration, exploitation? What am I actually seeing? Now, the great thing about Stealthwatch, we've worked with them for quite a few years, probably partnered with them for 4 or 5 years, since I was back in the security team. And it means that now that we've acquired them, that tool has already been integrated into existing Cisco products. So it works in conjunction with other tools that we already have. So who in this room has heard of ISE, Identity Services Engine? Great, all of you, that's good. So ISE actually can talk to Stealthwatch, and it can say, okay, you can see the threats that are going on, you can see traffic in there that I wouldn't see. If there's a threat, should I actually look at how I remediate it based on what the policy looks like? So it can then link into everything and say, okay, I'll sit on top and I'll talk to Stealthwatch and I'll talk to this network, and I'll use what I know to make that an even more contextually aware situation, so I know everything that's happening. And then further to that, we also have TrustSec. Who's heard of TrustSec? Again, and that's about segmenting the network and being able to say, what sort of pots do I want to put certain things, certain people, certain devices into, and how can I do it quite simply, working alongside ISE? So you've got this whole sort of situation now where you're no longer worried about what's connected on the end here, what's going into the data center, the servers, and worrying about the security wrapped around them. You can actually now say, okay, as to your customers, let's just build up a picture here, because having network visibility based on the security of the network is just as important as having just network visibility. So that kind of gives you an idea of where it's come from and why. And then we'll look at some of the threats as well. So we always see lots of threats. So we bring out a security report every year with loads of stats, loads of figures, and lots of things we see in the industry. Now, Cisco is actually considered one of the largest security companies in the world. And that's purely because of our size and all of the tools we have that feed into certain telemetry systems and analytical engines. And we see lots of sort of quite concerning, quite threatening things. So, for example, one of the stats you see there is over 91% of malware uses domain name system attacks, DNS attacks. Now, DNS attacks are very worrying and quite important because they are a huge chunk of threats out there on the network. And they are made up of a lot of different types of threats that you might have heard of. So DNS attacks are typically things like zero-day attacks. They can be cache poisoning attacks. They can be denial of service or distributed denial of service attacks. They're all fairly common things that we've all heard about at some point in the press. And DNS is kind of like a backdoor system to let these worms and pieces of malware through to start infecting machines, users, or big corporate environments. And the big worrying thing I thought when I read that report and saw that stat was that they make up a huge chunk of the malware we see, but very few organizations actually do anything about them, even though they know they are recurring attacks on their network. So there was a really good story, again, a few years ago when I was still in security. And reason sort of that's quite worrying is because it's not just talking about stealing corporate information and client lists and stuff like that. There was actually a nuclear war weapons program out in the Middle East. One of the Middle Eastern countries were running this program, building some lovely nuclear weapons. And somehow, someone sent a worm through to that network and actually cracked into it. And this worm was actually designed to go and affect the machinery that was being used to build these weapons. Now, the machinery being used was very specifically Siemens kit. So this worm was purely designed to affect one tiny element of this Siemens kit, very specifically. So what it was designed to do was to go in and find the centrifuges that were doing lovely, lovely scientific things and separating whatever they were using, and speed up the centrifuges by, I think, 0.5 milliseconds. So it's tiny, really insignificant, probably wouldn't notice it if you were maybe running that network. So that doesn't really mean much. However, what that caused to happen was because those centrifuges had been speeded up by a small amount, it meant that the ball bearings on the centrifuge wore out faster. They needed replacing more often, which shut down manufacturing much more often. It put that whole program back by about 2 years. So it had a huge impact on their threat to other countries who saw them as a threat. Now, it's believed that one of two governments, very big governments, actually did that, but no one's ever owned up to it. And it was a huge story because it just showed that we're not just talking about hackers sitting in their bedroom typing away on stuff. We're talking about governments actually using this information, using this, really smart people using really sensitive information and using malware to do sort of cyber espionage and warfare. Now, as I said, Cisco are a very big security company, and because of what we know, because we've got sort of threat defense engines and whole teams working around this, we've actually been able to start looking at reducing the time to detection of threats massively. So industry standards, as you can see there, in terms of actually finding a threat and then starting remediation on it, is anywhere from 100 to 200 days. We've got that down to 17 hours. That is massive, and Stealthwatch plays a massive part in that because we're looking at the actual traffic. We're not waiting for the attack to happen and then remediating. We're seeing it as it's happening and able to do something about it right then and there. The big one you'll probably hear a lot about this year is ransomware. Has everyone heard about ransomware? Yeah. So it's the one that's in the paper all the time at the moment. My mother-in-law got hit by ransomware in the last 2 months. My mother-in-law, you'd think I'd have told her about it. What happened with her was she'd clicked on something, obviously, and it locked down her computer. It completely froze it up and said that you're going to have to call this number and get someone to sort of remote dial into your machine to remediate and fix this and pay a £250 fine or fee. I felt awful. She had no idea what ransomware was, and I told her afterwards. So that's happening to users, but that's also happening on a really, really big scale for corporate environments as well, where they're being held to ransom by all this kind of stuff. So where would you start this discussion as a partner? So as I said, we're making this up of 3 really key elements: Stealthwatch, ISC, and TrustSec. Now, I've sort of looked at this in detail, and given my background in Cisco and security, I see Stealthwatch as definitely one of the easiest places to start this discussion around DNA and security. Because it's obviously an existing product, it integrates with existing kit, and because of what it does and how easy it is to roll this out and sort of start looking at information that's already on that network, it's a good place to start. So for example, if you were talking to a customer about maybe a switching refresh, you might want to start throwing this one in, saying, okay, great, you're doing that, you're looking at, refreshing that network, putting lots of lovely 3Ks or 4Ks, whatever they're doing. Have you thought about, okay, what are they doing on that network? How are you using this refresh to leverage the security on the network as well? Being able to know every host, record every conversation, and understand fully all of the traffic that's flowing through the network. Off the back of that, you can then potentially start a discussion around, okay, you can see what's going on, you can see there are threats, you can see there are risks on the network. So then, what about policy? Have you decided to say, okay, there are policies on this network that we have, that we've written, but we haven't actually policed, really? You all know the ISC discussion, I'm sure. So being able to actually say, right, defining what is normal, but then enforcing what is normal. Is Rebecca allowed to come in with a laptop when she's been on holiday for 2 weeks that has not got its latest security up to date and just come onto that network and just carry on? No, she's probably not. We want to use this to say, let's remediate the device and make sure it's up to date, but then also keep an eye on anything that's trafficking through that device and on that network from her machine. So we can actually say, okay, are we seeing someone hacking into the client-server conversations that are going on? And then finally being able to say, okay, and then finally linking that up to things like TrustSec. What else do they want to do on that network? Do they want to be a bit smarter? Do they want to make life easier? In the same way Nicoletta was talking about automation and being able to take big parts of that network, which typically take their IT teams quite a long time to do, so doing plug and play and rolling out devices when they're having a refresh, do we also want to say, okay, you've got a business policy, you've got a segmented business policy, should we look at how we can roll that out for you and make that much simpler and segment your network so it makes more sense to you and anyone else coming onto it with very different devices? So being able to sort of do all of that and tie it up, this is kind of the conversation we're looking at having, and we're looking at you having as well, and using all these products in your kit bag to start looking at how you can make your customers' networks a lot more contextual and a lot smarter as well. Now, a few other stories I was looking at when I was sort of putting this together. Again, we're not just looking at these sort of things all being connected to the network. We are looking at cows and all sorts of other lovely stuff. But another one we saw that was quite interesting was about a man called Barnaby Jack. Has anyone heard of Barnaby Jack before? No, great. Okay, so Barnaby Jack was a hacker. I say was because he died. He's quite a young guy. And he's most famous for, at a Black Hat conference back in 2010, hacking into a couple of ATM machines and making them dispense free money, effectively. So he's quite a smart guy, very, very smart guy. However, the other thing he's most famous for is showing how easy it is to exploit medical devices. Now, if any of you do work with healthcare and anything like that, they are typically known for not being the best at ensuring that all of that is wrapped up and nice and secure. So he was actually trying to highlight this point. So what he did at this conference, he showed that, okay, so now we have things like pacemakers and insulin pumps, which are connected to the network. They're smart devices, they're in people's bodies, and they are actually connected to wireless networks, potentially. And what he did at the conference was he showed that he could hack into a pacemaker from 50 feet away with his laptop and deliver an 830-volt shock to it, effectively killing someone. So I would never look at a laptop and think that was an assassin's tool. But that's kind of the route that we're being shown now, with so many other things being connected to the network and everyone going down this digital path. What else is going to be possible, and what else do we have to keep an eye out for? With the insulin pumps, it was the same kind of thing. He showed that he could sit in a radius of around 300 feet to anyone wearing one of these smart devices inside them for dispensing insulin, and he could cause it to go into overdrive and dispense way too much insulin, causing them to go into hypoglycemic shock. So this was a really big thing, and he was showing that there is a big hole here, and we actually need to be aware of this so we can ensure that that's not going to become a thing. And I think at the conference he showed the pacemaker one. He had a picture of Dick Cheney up, and he was showing that, you know, there's a lot of politicians who are fairly old and potentially aren't very well. So we could see all sorts of very interesting assassination attempts happening. So he's a really interesting guy, definitely worth going and having a look at sort of Barnaby Jack and some of the stuff he did. Now, one of the things I'm going to show you is actually Stealthwatch now. A lot of these instances, the whole point is that if they'd had something looking at the traffic of that network, looking at what was coming and going, what conversations were actually happening, this could have pretty much been prevented. They would have known, they would have seen exactly what was going on. So this is the Stealthwatch dashboard. Has anyone seen the Stealthwatch dashboard or seen a product demo of it before? It's all new. Of course you have. You're in security. Again, it's quite nice in that it's fairly different to some of the other Cisco stuff. It's nice and graphical, which I really like. Lots of graphs and charts. And what you've got here is kind of the landing page to show, OK, top threats, main concern index, threats over time, types, type of applications. And one of the key things in here is right the way over to the walk left, you've got this concern index up here. And the concern index is there to ensure that the customer gives a rating to the threats on the network so that they can actually say, OK, rather than getting every single possible threat, every policy violation, I want to have a rating based on what I need to see. I want to make my mission critical stuff really flag up. Because you're going to have people behaving stupidly, doing inappropriate stuff potentially, maybe stuff that's not particularly malicious, it's just potential sort of policy violation they weren't aware of. So you don't want every little thing pinging up and making this a redundant tool, if you like. Now, one of the sort of a customer use case we talk about, and I won't mention the name, is a big ISP who had big issues with malware, data leakage, fairly recently. And if they'd had Stealthwatch, it would have been avoided. So what happened to them is that somehow, again, some malware got onto that network. And it could be based doing, I think it was believed to be done through sort of the chain letter thing people see. Like on Facebook, for example, you get that mail and it says, if you send this on to 10 of your friends, nothing bad will happen to you. If you don't, you're going to have the worst luck for the next 7 years. So they're always looking for that silly person who's actually going to click on it and carry it on. So they're looking for the dumb device and dumb person, really, who sends that on. And that then propagates it around the network, gets it spread further, and starts cracking in and getting visibility and abilities on the network that it shouldn't have. Now, the first thing that hit this ISP, the first thing that happened was malware got on there and started causing denial of service attacks. So it was actually stopping their users from getting to things, doing stuff, and just doing their job. So they started having to firefight that and start getting around the issues that was causing. Then the next thing that happened was this piece of malware then got into their email system, their email management system, and it started sending out shed loads of spam, absolutely tons of spam from email addresses that they had. So users internally, and I don't know if it was actually using client information, that kind of stuff. It was carpet bombing with spam. So it was a big issue for a very, very big UK ISP. So they were there in the corner firefighting this, trying to fix it, trying to stop it, trying to remediate that whole situation. Meanwhile, in the background, whilst that was happening, they were effectively the smokescreen. The last piece of malware in there was going in to their client information and stealing data. So it was using the email spamming as a cover, as a filter, and using it to then send out huge lists of their customer information. And potentially, some of you in this room might have been affected by that because it's an ISP we all know, some of us use, and that was just going out and out and out, and it was in the news. And so it just showed how smart and how complex these attacks are, where they're designed to build so that they cause some confusion, do something else in the corner here, and do the whole kind of look at me, look at me. Meanwhile, this is where the real stuff is actually happening, and this is what we're doing. We're just shunting out loads of information that we can now sell and use to, again, hold people to ransom, get a lot of money off selling. You know how the sort of ransomware side of things work. Now, if they'd had something like Stealthwatch sitting in place, they would have been able to see there is a denial of service attack going on. There is an issue with our email going on. There is exfiltration going on. It would have flagged up in here and kept showing them that you have got huge amounts of information, data, being sent out via this route. You might want to go and check on that. And that would have given their analysts a chance to actually catch this in its tracks and stop it. as it was. Without it, it just went, and they ended up in the news because of it. So it's a very critical tool for being able to see exactly what is happening on that network, because it's giving network visibility based on the security of the network. I'm going to show you a little bit again, sort of inside the portal itself. I think I'm fairly limited today on what I can show you, because the lab is actually based out in San Jose, and apparently it doesn't wake up till 1 in the afternoon for us. So I'll talk you through some of the elements instead. But as I said, you can see along the top here, you've got those concern index sort of pieces which show you every couple of minutes, it updates and refreshes and says, right, this is what's happening, this is what I'm seeing, you might want to look at this. Then you've got your alarm types, alarms by today, top applications, and then at the bottom here, you've got this flow collection trend as well. So it shows over a period of time, these are the spikes, these are the dips, this is where you might want to hone in and have a little bit more of a look and a bit more of a dig around and see what's going on. Now, if we go back to the example of the Siemens example with the nuclear war weapons, being able to actually see everything going on in that infrastructure is very, very useful, because you want to start seeing who is talking to who, what's the traffic that's being passed. And if, for example, someone who is building something like that, or maybe a little less serious, maybe a car manufacturer or someone like that is building the next Audi R8 or whatever the new bells and whistles are going to be on a lovely car, they're going to want to keep all of that intellectual property fairly under wraps. They don't really then want their competitor, BMW, getting in and having a look and stealing their designs. So, for example, on factory floors, you do definitely want to see that, right, are the right things talking to the right things? Are machines talking to machines, and we're seeing nothing else going on? So, as I say, in a factory example, you can actually go into Stealthwatch and say, okay, I want to actually start looking at traffic that's passing, flows that are actually happening right now, and see if it's as it should be. Am I seeing anything suspicious? So your customer can go in here, start saying, okay, I'm going to choose a search subject. Yours works differently. Click on machines. There we go. And then the search I want to run, the pair I want to look at, we want to look on this network, which is predominantly factory machines talking to each other. Are they just factory machines talking to each other? Because the reason I'm putting exclude on this one is because if you've got a factory, a customer with a factory, and they are typically machines building stuff, you're going to want to go in there and exclude all the machines to say, okay, I know they're talking to each other, but is anybody else talking? So you can actually run reports inside Stealthwatch to say, do I see the traffic I'm expecting to see? Am I seeing everything that I should do? And happily, this one has come back as everything's fine and dandy. If it wasn't, you'd start seeing reports about, okay, no, we've actually seen someone spoofing the network. They're trying to plug into a certain port. They're doing something different. We're seeing very different traffic we shouldn't be seeing on a factory floor, for example. So that could have potentially helped, for all we know, the fighter jets or whoever else, or the car manufacturers of the world. The other thing I wanted to show you in here, but I'm not sure if I can, but I will try, is, again, for example, if we had that ISP and they had loads of information suddenly being sent out, we'd want to start saying, am I seeing a certain user or potentially a certain host sending things out? So if I go into here and start running a report, am I going to start seeing this machine with this IP address is sending huge amounts of data out, loads and loads of data, because that's probably a big, big red flag. I can't show you on here, unfortunately, it's not awake. But normally what would happen is this piece here, the exfiltration, would start flagging up. And we'd get a column here where it's showing everything's nice and yellow or green, but there's one user or one host which is bright red, and it's sending out over 200% worth of data, more than anything else on that network. And then we can follow it through, and we can actually say, well, where is it sending it? Who is the person doing it? And that's when it links into ISE. So you can say, okay, we can see the threat, we can see there's a risk. Let's use what we've linked into ISE and say, okay, who's the user? What's the machine? Where are they? So we can really start doing some proper remediation, doing some real digging around. And then see where are they actually sending it. So in the example that's normally on here, it shows a user called Lucy, and she's sending out huge, over 1 gig of data, and it's going to China. And this example doesn't have an office in China. So that's always a big red flag for a company who doesn't have an office in a location, sending that much information out. So it's there to look at flows, users, hosts, kind of pretty much everything, anything on that network that is having a conversation, that is talking, that has flow. It's looking at that flow and saying, what do I see? Do I see worms? Do I see attacks? Do I see policy violations? So it can make the assessment on, is this network actually safe and is it actually secure?